Hey guys, just thought I'd do a quick tutorial on OTT, which is basically over-the-top compression. I'll start off with this simple plugin here from Expo Records, OTT. So basically, the depth knob is the dry and wet knob. So if I play this drum loop, that's set to 100%, and that's set to 0. Usually I like to leave it around 10 to 30%, so let's leave it at 19 for now. Then you got time, which is basically attack and release. By the way, if you control click, it sets it back to original. The input gain is the input signal going to the compressor, and the output is after it's been processed coming out. So you can think of output gain as like the makeup gain. So now I'll move on to upward compression and downward compression. So upward is basically having these small, everything that's small in dB, it raises it up. So it basically does this to it. It basically does that and increases everything that's, if I chop this, it brings the small stuff higher in loudness. What we can do is if I bring upward compression up and render this, we can visually see, sorry, I'll bring this dry and wet to 100% so we can see the effect of it. So we can see over here that it's now squashed everything, so it's roughly the same in terms of level. So it's raised this up and reduced these levels. So that's upward compression. If I put upward compression all the way down, it's going to look like this. Now, downward compression is taking these peaks after a certain ceiling and bringing it down. So you can think of it as like a clipper. So if I bring downward compression all the way up, it's going to look like this. It chops everything off from a certain threshold and brings it down. If I were to bring both upward and downward all the way up, compression, it will look like that. And then if I were to bring everything down, it would look like this. So basically, if you want a squashed sound, you would want the upward and downward compression on the low end. So it will be good for things like basses. Basses and some synths would be better affected that way. So if you mess around with those parameters and render it out, you'll be able to see what's going on. Now that we've done upward and downward compression, these multi-bands here basically apply to the low, mid, and high end. So the low end is from 0 to 88 hertz, and then medium is 88 to 2.5K, and then high is 2.5K up. So if I look at it on the squasher, by the way, this mix set to 0%, so it's not really affecting the signal. You'll see that OTT is basically doing this. So these are the multi-bands for OTT. If I solo the low end, you might not hear it through YouTube, but if I increase the low end amount, you'll notice the difference there. It's also worth noting that if you control click on these green bands, it turns them off, and if you control click on the gray or the pink bands, they also turn off. Now what the pink bands are upward compression, since it's on this row, and what the green ones are downward compression on this row here. And this slider basically shows that you want more downward compression than upward compression in the mid-range. So what this means is that you want more downward compression than upward. And let's say you crank that, once it's processed through that, it then goes out this. So you can think of these three knobs as like your amp, low, mid, and high, if you have a guitar amp. So let's say we want upward compression on the high end, we want downward compression on the low end, and we want, let's say, downward compression on the low end. You'll hear that it's a lot more sizzly. So you can compensate by increasing the low end, or increasing that, and reducing the high end. So these three can act as a balancing act after it's so the signal flow basically goes, if we look at Squasher, the signal flow kind of is the same. So it goes input gain. So when you play your audio, it goes through the input gain. And then it'll go through your attack release, which is your time. And then your depth, which is the dry and wet. But this depth is now governed by these here. So it will then go through upward and downward compression, these three bands here, which depth is basically the mixed dry percent, and then it goes through your output gain, which is your kind of like your makeup gain. So if we hear this on some other tracks, let's say we've got some chords, and I'll put a OTT on. Let's say you want more high end. Let's say you don't want the low end to be affected, so you can kind of go like that and take these bands off. And we can also see it on a spectrum, how it's reacting. So if we print this out, it looks roughly the same. The transients are poking out a bit more. The cool thing with OTT is that if you increase this, you can start to hear the reverb coming out a bit more. So if I play it, I'll just put an L2 on it so that it doesn't clip. So you can see the transients are a bit more. We can hear it on some more. So if I render that out, you'll see that it's a bit more pokey. And when the time's all the way to 3 o'clock, if I bring the time all the way down and render that out, you'll see that this part here is lower in volume than this end here. So it's good, time is good for attack and release of the transients. If I bring the output gain of it, or the output gain, you'll see that the waveform will come up. It will look more squashed. Yeah, so if it's good to render it out, see what it does to the waveform, so you can get a visual representation of these parameters as well. And now I'll get onto Squasher. So Squasher is basically Cubase's version of OTT. I have a guitar loop, ambient loop here. So you can the good thing about Squasher is that you can have more control over dynamics and more parameters. So you can also sidechain it. So you can also change these bands. So if you want the low end to start at 200 hertz, and then or wherever, let's say the snare, you can change these bands around. That's the that's the upward and downward compression. So that's there, and then your input is the signal going in, and your output's the signal coming out. Threshold is your threshold of when it will happen. So these sliders here are basically the same as these sliders here, if you want to view it that way. Attack, release, drive, and gate. So gate basically is it's kind of like a guitar gate that you put before an amp. You can individually change the mixes here, and then an overall mix up here. And then you have a sidechain feature, which is good if you want to sidechain, let's say a kick to it, so it ducks down, or even a guitar to it, so whenever the guitar plays, this ducks down. You can also get a visual representation of these bands. So if I bring the up down, you'll start to see, and the ratios, you'll start to see where it affects the where it affects on here. You got an absolute and a relative mode, which is cool. I'll switch back to spectrum. The good thing about this is you can also solo bands. You can also change the volume of the out from these faders here, or you could do it down here. So yeah, that's a quick run through of OTT. I'll see you in the next one.